Good evening. This is John Bailey with Jim Benerofe. The program is People to be Heard, where people who have something to say have their say. Tonight, you've got Mr. Real Estate in White Plains, New York, USA, Mike Graessle of Rand Realty. Welcome to the program, Mike.
Thank you,
Jim. And he is the former White Plains Planning Commissioner under the Delfino administration who changed careers and went into real estate 14 years ago. Seems like just yesterday.
Yes.
And nobody knows real estate better in White Plains. He is here as the spring real estate market prime time is beginning to talk about the state of real estate in White Plains at the end of April 2016. So, what is your overview of the real estate market?
We have an improving market, there's no question about it. The market has begun as typical as spring market takes place, and we're seeing more activity. The unique situation right now is with rising prices is a lack of inventory. Part of this market is being driven by low interest rates, better employment than we've seen in many years, and the market values are increasing, but with so little to sell, people are being cautious, but putting houses on is generating good, strong sales. Last 3 properties I put on market, we had accepted offers within a week.
That's fast.
Yep.
Jim?
Now we have several markets for housing. We have the co-op market, the condo market, the private home market, and the rental market.
Yep.
What is the strength of each of those markets in order? In other words, which is the best, which is the next?
Okay, I know I had shared with John some of the material. The co-op market is without question right now the strongest market. It really reflects the inventory being available. It's first-time home buyers. We're seeing people who have never been involved with purchasing of a home, buying, and they're buying co-ops. And so that market is without question the strongest right now.
Here's a slide on that co-op market. Now that's single home sales. There we are, the co-op slide. And as we can see, that the prices are really holding nicely.
Prices are holding well. The comparison to the prior year would show that we've actually increased 63% this year versus last year. That's a phenomenal number. We're down a little bit from the last quarter of 2015. So we're seeing strength in that area particularly. We are seeing first-time home buyers of single-family homes as well, Jim. That's a different market totally. And the difference there is we're seeing people moving in really out of Queens and Brooklyn into the White Plains market. It used to be when people made a lot of money, they moved out of New York City and into Westchester. We're now finding people moving in from those boroughs, which typically were not expensive boroughs, to Westchester because of the high cost that has taken place in those particular areas of New York City.
So what is behind this co-op craze?
There aren't a lot of competition for co-ops. There are a phenomena of rental housing back in the 60s and 70s being converted into purchase units and co-ops. And there weren't a lot of other communities that had them. So it's a very limited area. It's southern Westchester particularly. And we're seeing those people looking, finding them in White Plains, and they're paying good dollars for them.
Are the co-ops, so are we running out of inventory and co-ops being available, or are people getting out and moving up to single homes?
We're seeing that, and condos. That market has improved as people are forming houses, they're getting married. A lot of the co-ops you're finding single people have been moving into, they get married, form a household, have children, and they need a larger place to live. So they're then buying either a condo, a larger place, or in many cases, one-family homes.
Mm-hmm. And they're not having problems finding financing for these co-ops.
Financing's interesting because with the change after the crisis back in some 10 years ago, we were seeing changes on the banking regulations, and those changes have required stronger down payments, and people need to be really qualified. The banks are monitoring qualifications much more closely. The appraisers are being cautious in making sure that their lending value is really there. So it's a more complicated and more difficult task, but they are happening. We are seeing it.
Do you think the banks are being a little bit too cautious?
I think after what happened, they need to be, and I think that's healthy for the economy. Nobody wants to go through a foreclosure, and so they're making sure buyers are qualified, and I think that's what we're seeing.
And what do you need to make a down payment on, say, a $300,000 mortgage?
Most people are looking at what we refer to as plain vanilla, is a 20% down, 10% at contract signing, and then the additional 20% at closing. We are seeing some all-cash buyers. It's not as common in the lower price range. We're seeing them typically in the $1 million plus range, and they have the money and they buy outright.
Well, let's turn to single homes now, if we can have the shot on single family homes. There we go. And there we're seeing a very intriguing price drop, but it's also holding pretty steady. We didn't have as many in sales in the first quarter, but this was, I think, probably due to terrible weather in the first quarter.
We had a very strange first quarter,
Yes,
that's
right.
for sure. When you compare it to last year's first quarter, we're up 13%. When you compare it to the last quarter of 2015, we're down 28%. So we're seeing some shifts, part of it due to climatic change, no question about it, and then the inventory change. So as we're seeing less houses, we'll probably see a slowdown in number of transactions. But the days on market has been dropping precipitously, and it doesn't necessarily show in that particular graph that you had on, but there's a graph, and I'm just going to see if I can show that to you. This is days on market, and that days on market is dropping pretty quickly, and it's likely that we will be seeing
There we go.
a reduced number of houses, and that means those fewer opportunities and choices will limit people. They're going to react quickly, and we're going to see days on market continue to drop.
Jim?
Now, more people buy co-ops than condos, and I personally don't entirely understand the reasoning behind that. Now, co-ops, I understand. Condos, I know tend to be more expensive, but the structure is a much better arrangement, at least in my opinion.
Okay, let me explain the difference between the two, because a lot of people don't understand. When you're buying a co-op, you're buying shares of the building with proprietary right to occupy a particular unit. When you buy a condo, you're buying the real estate. You own the space that you're in. So one, you're owning shares of an overall development. The other, you're actually owning that particular location, that apartment. So that difference is interesting. You pay more for a condo. Your taxes are separate in a condo. You pay tax and you pay monthly maintenance. In a co-op, since you own shares, you're paying taxes as part of your monthly maintenance for the number of shares you own. So there's a distinct difference. A lot of people prefer condos because they're owning the asset. They can make changes within limits as permitted by the board, where in a co-op you have to go in and get approvals for any change. It's a much more rigorous process.
And now you get tax deductibility on co-ops too, so you're not
Yes, you do.
just burning rent money every month.
That's correct. So both are ownership But one you own shares, the other you own the actual unit.
Right.
Since we talked about rentals there,
Yes, may as well segue into that.
huge number of rentals that are going to be coming on the market in White Plains within the next 2-3 years.
Yep.
Do you think that the demand is going to stay there and that they will, and they're going mostly for millennials? And apropos of that also, let me ask, the people that are buying houses, are these young people, older people, middle-aged? Do you have any breakdown of that?
We're seeing a mix. Condo buyers, we're seeing a number of people who are purchasing, having owned a one-family house and downsizing. Kids are off to college, they no longer need the amount of space, and so many are downsizing. We're seeing that taking place, but we're also seeing condos being sold to young couples as a move up from a rental, or in some cases from a co-op. The advantages of the condo is that, again, that ownership. The new rentals that you're referring to, I know there's one major one not far from where the studio is being under construction. There's a small developer who has developed a number of rental buildings throughout White Plains, and on North Broadway, off of Maple, a couple locations, Waller Avenue, and they've done very well. Our firm has been blessed in having the opportunity of renting those, and they rent very well. A lot of young people moving in. They love being near the downtown. It's an active downtown right now, so it's an attraction, and we're seeing that activity increasing. The newer building is going to infuse a very large number of units. That small developer that I was mentioning is developing units, 20, 40 units at a clip. So when you introduce 100 plus units, that's going to soften the market for a period of time until they get absorbed.
Soften the market, and then we don't really know how much that's going to soften.
Correct. Just simply when you introduce a large quantity of new units, there's only so many people who are buying at any one point, so over a period of time, they will be purchased.
Right.
If you oversaturate a market, we've seen that in the past, prices will soften a little bit. Some of the developers who have the financial wherewithal will introduce units slowly over a period of time so as not to harm their marketing.
Do you think this vast number of rental units, I think it's around 3,000 overall on the drawing boards? I'm guessing.
Yeah, you're probably in the ballpark.
Yeah.
My rental experiences have been very good in White Plains. I've represented a couple of builders, and they go quickly, the small ones. They tend to be priced to the market, and that makes a big difference.
Do you think there's any market for large apartments? And when I say large apartments, I'm talking about 3,000-4,000 square feet for people who are downsizing but want
that extra space. There's a small market for that, and if we were to mention a building like the Ritz-Carlton, you're seeing people buying those very expensive units there. So yes, there is a market. How big that market is, I would question. And I'm renting a place in Silver Lake right now that's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, and we're getting a lot of inquiries. We actually have identified a tenant already. Selling a unit on North Broadway that's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath unit, 1,500 square feet, and it's been a very slow process because there aren't that many people looking for 3 bedrooms in co-ops.
Yeah, if you go for a house,
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
with a lot more recreation space in it.
Yeah, it's $425,000. For $425,000, there are inexpensive homes that you could buy for that.
Right.
because that market in New York City, I think, is pretty strong.
It is. But in New York City, you don't have the one families in Manhattan, so they're buying townhouses and they're buying the large units.
Here's a question that a lot of people I talk to about selling their homes. They worry about this, and so I ask you this question. Why do certain homes not sell for prices the owner thinks they can get?
One of the owners of our company did a very interesting article, and it appeared in yesterday's Inman News, which is a real estate, and it talks about pricing and what people think a house is worth versus what the person who's buying thinks it's worth aren't always the same thing. So you have to really look at what has sold in the marketplace, not what other people have tried to charge for their house and haven't sold. So you look at the solds, and that'll give you a good indicator. If you can find a reasonable comp, if you were selling your house and the house across the street or next door sold, and it's similar, likely your house is worth a similar price to that house. People who try to equate their house to something that doesn't really relate in that neighborhood, they're not going to find that that sale will happen.
So a rising tide rises all boats, and a sinking tide lowers all boats? To use a hackneyed expression. But
it does, assuming that tide is in your neighborhood. So if your neighborhood is an expensive neighborhood, then you have good comps. You can't use an inexpensive area and say it's worth this amount in this area. You have to be using comps that really reflect local. And that local is in your neighborhood, not local in your community.
Well, that's interesting. How can an owner decide how much to add improvements to their home to enhance the selling price?
Okay, this is awkward because I'm going to tell you, you really need somebody who does real estate on a regular basis to give you guidance. Most people think that if they put a certain amount of money in their house, they're going to get that back. Back in 2005, 2006, if you put money into a kitchen, you were getting about 135% back, so it was a good investment. Bathrooms were about 112%. Today, if you put that money in, you will be very fortunate to get that money back. What you really want to do is make the house desirable in presentation. Fresh paint, etc. Clean, not a lot of things that are distractions from buyers coming in and looking at the house. So you don't want a lot of knick-knacks.
Like my messy office, as my wife is always telling me.
Clean it up before you sell it then. Easier
I
said
need
than
an
done.
archaeologist, right? But this is very interesting to me. So what you are basically saying is what you think people will like, your taste in your bathroom that you put in, or your kitchen that you put in, may absolutely turn off a buyer.
Great example, I had a house that we represented a buyer for, and it was actually in Jim's neighborhood. And we bought this house, and it had a 2-year-old kitchen. And it had a Sub-Zero refrigerator, Wolf stove, you know, all the high-end appliances, and it was a beautiful house. My buyer bought it, tore everything out of the kitchen, and put in a brand new, higher-end Sub-Zero with a Sub-Zero freezer, Sub-Zero wine cooler. I mean, it was phenomenal. And so somebody had spent all that money 2 years earlier, and it had no meaning to my buyer.
Now, something very near and dear to our neighbors in Greenberg is the question of revaluing your homes via an overall reassessment, which just happened in Greenberg. They reassessed all commercial and residential properties, resulting in not quite what they expected and what politicians have always told us, that 1/3 go down, 1/3 go up, and 1/3 stay the same. But it didn't happen in Greenberg. Could you explain how this happened? 42% of commercial properties decreased in their assessments after 60 years, and owners in the more ritzy sections of Greenberg are getting killed with tremendous increases.
Having spent 17 years in the mayor's office in White Plains back many years ago, when the state indicated that we all had to go to 100% assessment, the mayor at the time was a guy named Aldo Vecchio, bright guy, and his comment was, it's a right thing to do, we need to do it, and we want to make sure we do it last after everybody else has done it. Smart move. Why? politically unpopular, and if the formula really was a third, a third, a third, which it isn't, but if it were, you know, it's supposed to be tax zero. You're not supposed to be increasing or decreasing the tax through the reassessment. Somebody's ox is gored, and whoever is the one that's going to be feeling the increase most significantly is not going to be a happy camper, to say the least. They're going to be anxious over the impact. They're going to be wondering, can they still afford the house they're in? Are they going to be forced to move?
Most of them in Greenberg can't.
And in Greenberg, you have a number of taxing authorities because you have the villages in the town. You have a number of school districts. Some are overlapping. You have fire districts, which can also be overlapping. So you have a very complex system there in Greenberg, and people are frustrated and furious over the change. I'm involved with 2 transactions there right now. One of them, we have an accepted offer, and the value in the unincorporated town was actually decreased. And my seller was concerned that that would impact the sale that we already have agreed to, because the person would say the house is worthless. I assured him not only that is not the case, it actually is a benefit because more people can afford the house, and we're getting fair value because it's an arm's length transaction. We've had a number of offers. So
that's the silver lining.
For him, it is. For the people who have that increase, and they are angry, you could read that in the paper, see it on the websites, and people have just gotten frustrated. It's been a situation in other communities where when you do reassessment, many of the people who voted for the reassessment, the elected officials, don't make it through the next round of elections. It's a very difficult thing. I don't know what's going to happen. Mr. Feiner, the town supervisor, has indicated that he believes maybe they can introduce this over a 5-year period. But it's not a local decision. You have to get approval from the state legislature to do that.
But he's going to reassess in 5 years. That's their law.
I think his...
He's going to do it every 5 years now.
No, I think what he's talking about is instead of having a one-time increase, he would phase it in over a 5-year period.
Yes, that's on the increases just announced. However, they are going to reassess every 5 years.
Yep.
So it's an endless stream of nervousness.
Well, I think... Okay.
One of the things I have a question about as far as reassessment is concerned, we have all sorts of benefits that we give to certain people, like if you're over 65, you get a lesser tax. If you're a veteran, you get a lesser tax. And I don't know what other issues are involved, but there are some. I think that affects the assessment system in a negative way because those aren't real estate factors, and there ought to be some other way that we could make compensating factors for that and leave the assessments alone on the houses.
Well, I think what is taking place, Jim, really doesn't address that type of issue. The state has authorized the ability to recognize people who have done certain things, veterans, etc. And so that comes off their assessment, off their taxes. So the assessed value is there, but their actual tax payment is reduced. And that'll be consistent, I think, afterwards. The issue that John is bringing up really is if you had a house and it's been assessed at a certain number, and it now, because of this reassessment, is adjusted upward, that number could force you out of your house. And
can't afford it.
And yes, and there's another side of the argument is there are people who have new houses and people who have older houses next to each other. The older house was assessed when it was new. The newer house was assessed when it was new, and there's a big disparity between those. So they may sell for around the same price, but the value is very different from the assessment side. The argument that supports
I didn't realize
that is that if that house was there for 50 years, it's paid to support the street system, the parks, etc. And so a new house gets built, and those things are already in place. You know, they're able to take advantage of the schools that have been built with money that came in from the other house. So it's not quite as clean and clear as everybody would like it to be. But if you bought, and the understanding when you bought was your assessment is this amount, therefore your taxes are this, and now you change it, it's going to be very
If you change it frequently, 5 years goes by like that.
And some communities, they actually change it based on arm's length transaction sales.
And combine that with the school taxes, which never go down.
Totally different topic.
That's right, but
time.
I mean, that is a major problem. You can't have that. But anyway, we have about a minute and 10 to go, and would you have any last words or words going forward about the real estate market? But should we put your home on now or wait?
Right now is an extremely good time to actually put a house on. The market is strong. People are still very much looking at this as a spring market. People like to move during the summer so that the children aren't in school during that time period. People who are even moving locally like to move during the summer because it's just easier. So I think right now we're seeing a good market. Money is available from lenders. The market prices are increasing. They're not going to get cheaper over time.
Except for condos, which are having a little bit of a problem.
That's true.
A big problem.
They're a bit soft. But also part of that is the more expensive condos were on the market a year ago that were new.
And they're gone.
They're gone.
Snapped up.
Yep.
So that accounts for the lower price of condos, as we see on that slide down. I kind of thought that. Well, Mike Graessle, it's always a pleasure getting a bird's eye view of the real estate market in White Plains, and it's been somewhat steady over the last year or so. But you think this is going to be a big win this year?
Yes, I think we're going to have a great year. Not a good year, a great year.
May that be thus. John Bailey saying thank you, Mike Graessle with Rand Realty, for giving us the view on the real estate. And good night, Jim Benerofe. Good night.
Jim, good to see you again.
People to be heard.